To get the Big Buck Registry after show and other exclusive content right now, go to patreon.com/Big Buck Registry. Today on Deer Hunt.
You've probably heard the phrase, it's not practice that makes perfect, it's perfect practice that makes perfect. So when I practice with awareness, like we said before, of my body and of my positions and movement patterns, when I practice that way, then that's going to refine it and make it my automatic go-to. So when you're in the shot or when you're in the woods, those things just happen. That's where your mind should be.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 293. Christian Williams. Bow Shop Biomechanics, and Archery Strong. Support for the Big Buck Registry and the Deer Hunt Podcast comes from -33 Merino Wool Layering System, keeping you warm on the coldest days while staying breathable and wicking away moisture on the wet ones. Rackology, everything you need in one bag. Now available at Rural King and Orslyn Farm and Home storefronts or online at www.rackology.org. Grizzly Ears, the most advanced engineered wireless earbuds for the outdoors. Covert scouting cameras, remote cameras for hunting, wildlife, and security. And Big Buck merch. You can get cool, high-quality Big Buck t-shirts, long-sleeve t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. And show support for this podcast by visiting bigbuckmerch.com. That's bigbuckmerch.com.
Hey, this is Jeff Johnson with Trophy Scan, and you're about to hear on the Big Buck Registries podcast.
I'm Philip Vanderpool of the Virtue TV, and you're listening to one of my very favorite podcasts, Deer Hunt by Big Buck Registry.
This is Aaron Stonehawker with Tacticam. You're listening to my favorite podcast, the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow predators. My name is Jay, and thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. For Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller and the entire staff here at the Big Buck Registry, welcome to the show. There are a couple things I'd like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please check us out on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and leave us a review. With your help, we're going to try and push this show up the iTunes charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to leave a review and subscribe to the show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access and notification each and every week that a new show is released. You can also access this show in its entirety on YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry. It's all right there for you to access on demand at your fingertips. Regarding the harness program, we're out of harnesses. We need your help. Anybody that has spare harnesses, please send an email to jay@bigbuckregistry.com. When an athletic event involves repetitive motion in order to achieve success, it's important to understand the biomechanics of that movement. The golf swing, pitching a baseball, and the archery shot are good examples. Christian Williams, an exercise science specialist and avid bow hunter, breaks down the mechanics of the bow shot, how to improve strength and endurance, which muscles are important, and injury prevention. And of course, we talk a bunch about how it all relates to bow hunting. We'll get to our entire interview with Christian Williams in just one moment. But before we do, let's hear from our friends at -33 Merino Wool Products and Jim Keller with the Deer News. My experience started with a visit to the -33 headquarters in Ashland, New Hampshire, for a tour of the warehouse and factory, followed by an interview with John Glidden, the owner and CEO. John is a straight-shooting New Hampshire Yankee, if ever there was one, and that straight-shooting attitude reflects in his product. It's high-quality stuff that does exactly what the company says it will do. After a steady hike on a cold November day up the backside of a steep New Hampshire ridge, with the sun setting and the temps dropping, I wasn't soaked with sweat. Because of the -33 merino wool base layer, I was comfortably warm and dry and itch-free. Any perspiration was wicked away from my body, and my human scent was neutralized from the natural properties that the wool brings to the table. I was thankful that I was wearing that exact base layer when that dominant buck appeared. Rest assured, I'll be wearing my -33 merino wool base layer next year when the temperatures start to drop. I'd encourage you to check out -33 for yourself. Visit www.minus33.com. That's MINUS 33.com and grab some base layers for the rest of this season or next. And please let them know you heard about them on the show by using the discount code BIGBUCK33 to get 10% off your next order.
Now here's Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Our first story, DNR settles dispute between two hunters who shot the same deer. This story is from the mlive.com website and was reported by Brandon Champion. A DNR officer recently settled a dispute between two hunters in Michigan who had shot the same deer. According to an official report, the incident occurred in southern Isabella County during the opening days of firearm deer season when Conservation Officer Mike Haas received a complaint that a hunter had stolen another hunter's deer. CO Haas arrived on scene and interviewed both hunters, inspected the shot deer, firearms, and the hunting sites. After following the blood trails and inspecting the bullet wounds, it was determined that the first hunter had shot the deer through its hind legs. The deer then traveled to the neighboring property where the other hunter shot the deer, killing it. The first hunter was upset with the findings and believed that the deer belonged to him since he had shot it first, but CO Haas explained the law and notified the hunter that his neighbor had shot and tagged the deer legally. In a first, researchers find CWD prions in deer semen. This story is from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel website and was reported by Paul A. Smith. For the first time, researchers have documented chronic wasting disease prions in semen from white-tailed deer at U.S. deer farms, according to a recently published paper. While further work is needed to determine if the prion-containing semen could infect another animal, the finding could have major implications for the captive cervid industry, which relies heavily on shipments of semen for artificial insemination. A variety of state and federal regulations seek to prevent spread of the disease by prohibiting transfers of CWD-positive live deer or carcasses. However, no restriction is currently placed on movement of deer reproductive tissues or fluids. A single straw of semen from a choice buck can sell for more than $10,000. The study, published December 30th in PLOS 1, was conducted jointly by researchers at the University of Texas Science Center, UT Health, at Houston, the Prion Research Center in Colorado State University, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Despite more than 50 years of research on CWD, the exact events involved in its transmission in captive and wild animals are still unclear, according to the authors. But there is no current plan to begin research to assess the infectivity of the semen on deer, which would require a special facility and greater funding, Morales said. Brian Richards, emerging disease coordinator at the U.S. Geological Survey, said the deer semen research provided one more piece of understanding on CWD. Like so many findings, it also leads to more questions, he said. He would want to know, for example, if semen with CWD prions is capable of infecting a doe it is placed in, and if it could result in an infected fetus. None of this is inexpensive and it's not quick, Richard said, but no one, not any longer, can dismiss its importance to the health of deer inside or outside the fence. Missouri increases feral hog elimination efforts, adapts strategy for 2020. This story is from the Missouri Department of Conservation website. The Missouri Feral Hog Elimination Partnership eliminated 10,495 feral hogs from Missouri in 2019 and will increase its efforts in 2020 as multiple agents work together to eliminate feral hogs from the state. Feral hogs are invasive, destructive pests that roam wild in certain areas of Missouri and other states. They're aggressive animals known to prey on turkey poults, fawns, freshly seeded fields, full mature crops, as well as other wildlife. They're known to carry diseases which can be transmitted to humans, dogs, and domestic pigs. Increased efforts include a workforce focused on feral hog elimination in key areas, including Mark Twain National Forest lands, beginning in late January. Although the feral hog problem in Missouri increased in the 1990s when hog hunting for recreation gained popularity, DNA research suggests that feral hog populations has since spread via truck and trailer, not through a natural migration of the species. As groups began raising and promoting European wild boar for hunting, some of them were released intentionally on public land. Even two feral hogs introduced into a new area is a big problem because they're highly adaptable and prolific breeders. Their numbers grow at an alarming rate. One sow can give birth to 2 litters of about 6 piglets twice per year, resulting in a population growth rate of about 166% per year. Report feral hog sightings or damage and learn more about feral hog elimination at www.mdc.mo.gov/feral hogs. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. Special thanks to Tim Donzie, Daniel Applebaum, and John Geis for leads on the stories this week. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller for the Deer News. Without further ado, here is Christian Williams. Christian Williams, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Jay. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking.
It's my pleasure. I've been following you on Instagram for a while, and you've intrigued us over here. You've touched on some biomechanics of the bow shot that I don't see delved into very deeply the way you do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to approach things in a way that sheds a little more light into what's going on behind the bow, in a sense. So meaning with the human body, the archer, and how we can do everything from optimize a shot, prevent injury, reduce pain for those folks that do have shoulder pain and do have shoulder issues when they shoot. So it's a biomechanical approach, I guess, to archery, as I'll sometimes describe it.
I like that approach. I like the biomechanics of things. And there's anything you do that's athletic, right? Whether it's shooting a basketball, throwing a baseball, hitting a baseball, golfing, throwing a frisbee, archery, it's all got some kind of biomechanical system that you kind of have to subscribe to in order to get it right.
Sure. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of bases that are missed, and a lot of key principles that are missed if we don't consider it. What I like to compare it to a lot of times is if you take those other sports, whether it be golf is a big one, baseball, particularly pitching, is a big one. We've crossed over the line in those other sports a little while ago in getting to a more biomechanical approach, considering the human body on a much deeper level. And then from that, looking at how we can train the body outside of the sport to, again, be better through the shot,
right,
performance, injury prevention, all those things. So I think it is a big component, and that's part of what drove me to start diving into this. Is I hadn't seen a lot of consideration. There's obviously a lot of awesome information out there about equipment, and even archery coaching and technique and those sorts of things. That's been covered really well and continues to be covered well. But that biomechanical side and considering the actual archer seem to have been missing,
right,
at least me. So I've tried to shed a little light on that, and it's been fun and a lot of positive feedback, and learning more every day.
I appreciate you doing that, because I don't see a lot of instructional anything going on social media when it comes to the bow shot. I see a lot of people shooting. I see a lot of people practicing. I see a lot of people with a form. I don't know if it's good or bad. We're going to find out if it was good or bad. And I see people taking incredibly long shots, almost exhibition style, and we've gotten into some technical aspects of bow shooting, but I don't think we've ever gotten into the biomechanical technical aspects of how to move your muscles and joints and shoulders and arms, and what is the right position. I'm not sure.
Sure.
It's not, unless you took it in school maybe, and I don't even know if they teach it in school. It seems like it could very easily be misguided. It could be overlooked, and you just kind of start practicing. And if you're hitting the target, you're hitting the target. But there might be some things you can do to improve not only your shots and your placement, but perhaps the longevity of the joints you're using. Because I know that as we get older, things start to break down. So if you're not taking care of the muscles the right way, or the joints the right way, that you might not be shooting a bow for very long.
Sure. And to that point, I always like to open up these conversations with making the goal or the intention of what I do very clear. And that is, to what you said, archery is physical, archery is athletic, and archery is demanding. And with that, there is wear and tear, there's breakdown, and there's considerations that we have to think about when it comes to preserving the body or using the body in the best way. And my ultimate goal is to make sure that those shoulder issues and bodily issues never get in the way of someone enjoying archery and, in this case, enjoying bow hunting. I know that how much bow hunting means to me. An hour ago, or maybe an hour and a half ago, before we just started talking now, I was sitting in the dark waiting for some deer to get out from under me, and just sitting there thinking, man, it's just so exciting. And there's just so many good experiences and so many lessons that come with archery and with bow hunting. And again, that's something that I don't want anyone to miss out on, because I know what it's meant to me, and I'm sure you've had your experience as well. So yeah, it's important to me. That's for sure.
Cool. All right. We're going to get into it. Let's talk about your background. How did you get into this? Where are you from? How did you kind of fall in love with this whole aspect of both the biomechanics of archery, but deer hunting in general?
Sure. So again, my name's Christian Williams. I'm from Western Pennsylvania. I am only 25, so I don't have as many years as some folks probably listening, but this journey started a number of years ago. I guess I should say that when I was a boy, like a lot of us, we went hunting with our dads, or we went hunting with our grandfathers or uncles. And truthfully, throughout my childhood, it didn't mean a ton to me. I enjoyed it. I went every year with my dad, and we'd do some different types of hunting, and I had some great experiences and some exciting memories and exciting time in the woods. But it didn't really click, didn't hit me really hard until I got later into my teenage years. Like I said, I'd been hunting all my life, but as I was looking for something new and something challenging, I eventually picked up a bow. And what led me to that is I was in competitive CrossFit, for those that are familiar with it. And I'd been kind of getting out of that. I had a change of heart and wanted to do something different. So I sold a couple pieces of equipment that gave me some extra cash. And I'd been thinking about it. And I said, man, I've always been wanting to get into archery hunting and get into bow hunting. So it didn't take long. It was maybe within a week or two, I had bought a bow. And I shot and really fell in love with how difficult it was. So in the meantime, while that was happening and I was starting to get into archery hunting and archery in my teen years, I was also going to school for exercise physiology. So after 4 years, I had gotten a degree in exercise physiology, which, for those that don't know, that encompasses everything from the biomechanics of the body, heavy in anatomy, looks at different sports performance and injury prevention. So that gave me a good foundation. But what really set me up to do what I'm doing now with Archery Strong is, while I was in college earning that degree, I worked at a sports injury office called Next Level Spine and Sports Injury Center here in north of Pittsburgh.
Wow.
And okay. I worked there for about 5 years. Again, I started that during college and continued to work that out of college. And that taught me so much, and that gave me the basis to do everything from look at how the body moves, be able to assess how the body moves. I was looking at shoulders every single day, prescribing what we call corrective exercise to address movement dysfunction and dysfunction with the human body. So correcting those things, assessing those things. And I did that again for about 5 years. And truth be told, I didn't love it. I loved what I was doing, and I loved the content of the job, but I didn't like the nature of the job, to put it short. But what I'm really thankful for is that, again, it gave me the background, the experience, and the basis to apply it to archery. And as the story goes, I love telling the story, but I'll keep it short.
You can go long. It's a podcast. That's fine.
I, again, live here in Western Pennsylvania, and I have a really good farmer friend. His name is Mr. Croft. And Mr. Croft and his brother own about 400 acres, 300 acres or so, smack dab in the middle of one of the fastest growing places in America. It's Cranberry Township. Grown really fast. And these guys, despite everything, they just keep farming. They don't want to sell their land. They just keep farming. And unfortunately, a couple years ago, in a freak accident, a tree branch fell and killed Mr. Croft's brother. And at the time, I'd been getting to know him. I had been hunting on his property, and I wanted to do something special beyond helping him bale hay and helping him do things around the farm. I wanted to do something special for him. So the story goes that he had been telling me about a groundhog problem that he had been having because in this Cranberry Township, you cannot hunt with a rifle. So no one had done much about them for many years. So a big groundhog problem. And I said, you know what? I want to try to kill 100 groundhogs with my bow for this guy this year. Just something cool to do on top of what I was doing to help him. And certainly was a great hunting experience too along the way. But as I was doing that and I was going throughout the spring and the summer trying to get rid of these groundhogs with my bow, I was shooting a lot and I was hunting a lot. And I was working the sports injury job at the time. And I just started to think that there's got to be a way that I can, with as much as I'm shooting and practicing to do this, to meet this 100 groundhog goal, there's got to be a way to make sure that I can keep shooting and I can shoot the volume of arrows that I'm shooting without having an issue. So I started to think about what I was doing at work with the corrective exercise, movement assessment, and injury prevention and pain relief. And that's how the idea got born. I started to play with some things as far as on the training and exercise side, and started to look into it more and had been hearing a lot of stories about how guys were running into problems with their shoulders and couldn't shoot or would have pain when they shoot. And I ran with it. I remember the fall after that spring and summer when I had been hunting those groundhogs, I was at my favorite farm in the world here in Mars, Pennsylvania. And I was able to harvest a doe one night in October. And I called my dad and I was so excited. And afterwards I was just thinking, man, this means so much to me to be able to be here, having this experience on this farm, calling my dad about this successful hunt. I don't want anyone to ever have to miss this or give this up. And that's when I had the idea, and that's when I really ran with it. So I had this combination or perfect storm of an education, a job experience, and then a real passion for bow hunting to combine them all together. And, truthfully, I didn't really put a huge emphasis on whether I thought it was going to be a successful idea or whether I thought there was a huge need for it. But I thought that it was a possibility, and I ran for it. And just over 2 years later, here we are.
Gotcha. That's a great background. So it started back in college, and then you found some common ground, and it sounds like you found something that although the original wasn't all that where you wanted to be, you found some ways to help people. It sounds like in a field that you really like because of the deer hunting. That's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been an exciting journey so far. That's for sure.
Very nice. Well, I'm hoping we can enlighten people that are listening to this to kind of break down your background certainly filled you in on a lot of the other things that you should probably think about from time to time as a archer of some sort. I think these things get overlooked. I don't think we think about, I should have my arm in a certain spot or whatever. Unless you're a competition archer, you're just trying to make the kill shot. So and I guess you don't have a lot of time to think about everything, but maybe you can go into some ideas of how can we. I've heard this term a lot, muscle memory. How do you get to that point where it just feels natural but that you can still identify if you're off? That's the part that always kind of throws me off is like, when do I got to find the zone.
Yep.
But oftentimes it's not being able to identify when I'm out of the zone that throws me off.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I would say the pathway to that, definitely at first, it starts with awareness. And what I mean by awareness is awareness of the possibility for your body to be in a bad place with function and to be in a good place with function, or you could say a bad place with performance or a good place with performance. So just being aware that that's even a thing, right? Because, to your point that you had just mentioned, a lot of us don't think about it. And I will absolutely say that there are times where I just pick up my bow and I go outside, or I set up in the range and I just start to shoot and I don't think about it. So awareness is the first thing, because if there's a problem or if there's a solution, you have to be aware of it first, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So being aware that there is this biomechanical side to archery. And like I mentioned before, we've looked at it, and it's highly trained and highly valued in other sports like golf and baseball and whatnot. So being aware that archery is the same realm. It's heavily dependent on the human body, and it's something that plays a really important role, because the bow doesn't fire without the archer, without the human body.
Right.
So I would say awareness is first. And then after that, once someone's aware of that biomechanical side, then it comes down to education. So education is next, in the sense that an archer can begin to learn the different parts of the body. And obviously everybody knows I have my arms, I have my shoulders, but the different parts in a little bit more depth, as far as what does a shoulder look like? If you probably ask the average person, well, what's your shoulder? They just say, I don't know. It's where my arm connects.
Right,
and
right.
There's a lot of detailed anatomy in there. And once you really get in there and you start to learn about the shoulder, at least to me, it's really fascinating how our bodies in general were created, but more specifically our shoulders. It's a unique structure, just like any machine. If you look at your car, or you look at your chainsaw, or whatever it might be, there are specific structures that do specific jobs. And as you lay a foundation of what are these structures, what do these structures do well, what do these structures not do well, what is best for them, what's the least effective thing for them, all those different things start to lay a foundation for understanding what is going on when you're shooting your bow. Now, the hard connection, and that's where I try to help people, and that's where I really try to educate through different social media and podcasts and articles and those things. The hard connection to make is looking at, okay, we have the shoulder. I kind of know what it does, but what does that mean for archery? And that's where I've tried to come in is look at the anatomy, look at how that shoulder was designed to function, and say, okay, this is something that you can get away with. This is something that may not be good. This is something that you want to strive for, and start to divide that into all the categories, whether it be the draw arm, the bow arm, and start to gain a better understanding of what's going to be best for the shoulder, not only from a protective standpoint, but also from a performance standpoint, and further on going down the line. So once you have that awareness of the biomechanical side, you start to become more educated and understand the shoulder structure and how it functions. And then we can start to build on how it applies to archery. After we apply it to archery, then you can make the connection between, okay, this is how the shoulder is positioned, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I should be feeling, should not be feeling, and you connect it on a personal level, I guess is the best way to put it.
Okay.
And you start to take ownership of what you're feeling and what you're doing, because now you've developed an awareness, you've developed an understanding, and now you can execute it or practically act upon it in your shooting.
Okay. So how do we break that down through audio to describe where you start, what are the little things that matter, and what does it feel like when you're feeling it? Yeah,
so the simplest way to me to explain it or to try to understand it is that you're essentially, when you're shooting, you're pulling against an immovable object. So, a good example is when you start your lawnmower, your push mower. The immovable object is the mower, because it stays on the ground and it stays stationary. Mm-hmm. And then you pull on that string and that string moves. So in a sense, the bow is the immovable object. And in order to have an immovable object, you have to have a force that's keeping it in place. And in the case of archery, what we call the bow arm, or the support arm, which is holding the bow, that is going to be stabilizing. That is going to be bracing. I often compare it to a support beam. That support beam not only needs to be solid, like we just said, but it also needs to be positioned in a sense. So if you think about setting a support beam for a house, that support beam can't be leaning. That support beam needs to be lined up. That support beam needs to be linear in the sense that it's going to support the weight that is pushing down on it, or in the case of archery, the weight that's being pulled into it. So there's a lot of lining up that occurs there. When we think about what you're feeling in that support arm, it all starts with the shoulder blade. I often compare the shoulder blade to a foundation in a sense. So your arm and your arm bone, called the humerus, sits in that shoulder blade. And that shoulder blade is extraordinarily reliant on muscle to hold it solid on the body. The picture I paint, and for those that are interested, they can look it up, there's only one true bony connection that keeps the shoulder blade on the body. It's one small connection. And if that small connection weren't there, then it would be entirely just muscle that holds your entire arm and your entire shoulder on the body. And I say that to emphasize the importance of the muscle that, again, braces that shoulder blade as a foundation for the arm to sit in when you're drawing against it. So it's funny you asked the question, what does it feel like? Because I just shot a video yesterday that was describing what someone may feel. And basically that shoulder blade, it should be anchored down. It should be anchored back. We say almost like putting it in your back pocket so that it's solid and so that it's stable. So an archer should feel the muscles around the shoulder blade engaged and solid. And if someone listening right now can reach behind their back and they can feel it's almost like a bony triangle on the outside of your back, that's the shoulder blade. And again, there's a lot of musculature that attaches to that that's going to brace as you're pulling against it. Right. The joint itself is also going to be very stable, but I find the most tangible feeling that you can have in that support arm or that bow arm is going to be in the shoulder blade as it's set down and back. And when I say down and back, that is, again, like if it's your left arm, it's being put in your left pocket. You're not squeezing it towards your spine. You're not rounding it forward. It's being set down and back like it is, I guess, flat on your rib cage in a sense. And that, again, is going to be the area that highlights with tension. So we have that bow arm, and then we go over to the draw arm. Once we have that solid support or that solid foundation, now I have something to pull against. And in a similar fashion, that shoulder blade is going to dominate, or should dominate, that pull, because the shoulder blade is like the first link in the chain. So if you hook a chain to the back of your truck, you see how all the links follow along as you move the truck. The shoulder blade is the same way. As I move that shoulder blade and I pull that shoulder blade towards my spine, down towards that opposite back pocket, as I'm leading with that shoulder blade, the rest of the shoulder, the arm, the elbow, and the hand all kind of follow suit and follow that same path. And that, hopefully in a nutshell, is an understandable description of that.
Okay. And I understand that, because you are working with a body part where there's not a lot attaching it. If you ever took the front shoulders off of a deer and when you're butchering,
right? That's a great way to think about it. Yep, it's the same way in the human body. You really can take the front shoulders off of a deer with just your knife, right?
Right.
Because again, all of those connections are near all of them in most organisms, or most animals, I should say, are just muscular connections. So yeah, again, that just shows the importance of it.
Got it. A lot of muscle and a ball joint, and that's it. Yep. That's what's going to connect you to your main frame, I guess, is a way to think about it.
Yep, right. You got it.
So as I'm approaching the shot, can you describe some of the points, and I'm sure there's more points than though you could fine tune, and probably a lot of different points of connections, where your arm should be, where your shoulder should be, what angle should you be taking. What does that look like? If you had a checklist and you had to run through it quickly, what is that checklist like? So I can check myself as I approach my shot.
Sure. So that checklist would start with the bow arm, would start with the front arm. And in particular, like we had said, it would be setting that shoulder blade down and back. If it's your left arm, it's in your back left pocket. I want to set that down, stabilize that, make sure my hand and my arm is in the position that I like it. Some people like a little bit of elbow bend. Some people prefer a straighter elbow. And when that's set, then I have my immovable object or my platform to pull against. And after I've made the check number one, that shoulder blade set, that front arm solid. So hand's not solid or tense, but arm is solid. I'm ready to pull. And the very first thing is I'm thinking about my back. I'm not thinking about my hand and how it's pulling. I'm not thinking about my elbow. I'm thinking about that shoulder blade.
Okay.
And I'm bringing tension into that shoulder blade and initiating, the big word there is initiating the start of the pull by beginning to put, if it's my right arm drawing, by beginning to put that right shoulder blade in my back left pocket. So I initiate that pull. That's going to, with that shoulder blade, that's going to be my check number two. And then my check number three is allowing and making sure that my elbow in my hand follows suit and works in conjunction with that shoulder blade retracting down and back. It's traveling the same path. It's pulling back and almost rotating a little bit behind me, as Tom Klum likes to say. And those would be my big three.
Okay.
To solidify that front arm and shoulder blade, to initiate with the draw arm shoulder blade, and then to ensure I'm following suit with my elbow in my hand and my arm is number three.
Gotcha. All right. Now, I've noticed on your Instagram page, and your Instagram page is called Archery Strong. I guess we had mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
What is your front? I noticed that you had emphasized a few times that it's not a stiff arm straight out 90 degrees. It's almost like you got to drop your shoulder, and it's not straight out. It's almost like it rests below your shoulder in a sense, where your elbow's below the shoulder slightly. And I think it's for a more stable position, but I'll let you explain.
If you think about it as a chain, everything from the shoulder blade up into the joint and then into the arm and into the bow. So there's definitely a chain effect there.
Okay. So if you meet all these points, if you rotate your front shoulder correctly and your pull arm and your scapula, and you've got all that working correctly, right? To get to the pull, right? So you're at the pull. From after you reach that point and it's correct, what should occur next?
We're starting the pull here, or we have pulled? You've
pulled back.
Okay. So a lot of what's going to happen there once you've pulled back, and we're going to say that we're correct, is a lot of maintenance. So maintaining position, where just because you've started something one way doesn't mean it's going to continue that way. A lot of times it does, and it should. That's the goal. Start something a certain way and maintain it as you go. But going back to that word awareness, there has to be some awareness of what position is your body in, and is it leaving that position? Because when you think about holding a bow or aiming, or even just after you've accumulated some shots, that fatigue is going to play a big role, and it's going to be a thief of good position in a sense. So largely in the front arm, when we're talking about the bow arm, the support arm, that's going to be all about maintenance, maintaining that shoulder blade down and back away from your ear, maintaining the upward pressure on the bow from the shoulder and into the hand. maintaining that bow arm. As far as the draw arm, right, you hear a lot about back tension and different things like that. The feelings of back tension vary between people, but back tension is going to heavily involve the position of the shoulder blade and the position of the elbow. So both of those things, in some sense, need to be behind a line. If you drew a line from your bow hand to your, or we'll say from your bow hand straight up your arm and straight back through both your shoulders and kept going, that shoulder blade should be behind the line and that elbow should be at the line, pretty darn close, and depending on the other positions, maybe even a little bit behind. So again, Tom Klum, a recurve coach that I've talked with a couple of times, he describes it almost as rotating backwards. So again, we're talking about the elbow and the shoulder blade. So that elbow is not forward, it's not going out in front of you, or I guess it would be away from you. It is being pulled back, and that is an interesting two-way relationship. And what I mean by that is when the elbow stays back, the shoulder blade is going to be encouraged to stay back as well, and then vice versa. If we now talk about the shoulder blade, that shoulder blade should continue to squeeze towards the spine.
Okay.
It should be engaging towards the spine. So if someone were to look up the back and the shoulder blades, the inside of that shoulder blade, that's kind of the sweet spot, the hot spot that's pulling towards the spine. And in that two-way relationship, when that shoulder blade's pulling towards the spine, that elbow's also following suit, like we talked about in the draw as well. So again, they kind of feed each other and they kind of work together and work in conjunction to maintain that tension, to maintain that pull, because we need some pull there, pulling against that immovable object to create stability.
Okay. And this, I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but how much is too much? Or can there be too much of that pulling towards the spine? And what I mean by that is I relate it to throwing a baseball, for example. Mm-hmm. They say that you should throw 85% of what you can because you lose control if you go beyond that.
Yeah.
How does that relate?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One important variable to take into account there is the bow. So it depends on the let off. In a compound bow, it depends on the weight of a recurve bow. But in general, to your point, it doesn't need to be excessive. Okay. It certainly doesn't need to be with all your might. It needs to be enough that you feel stable. You feel like you're pulling into that back wall a bit. I personally believe that that's going to vary between people. You certainly are not going to take 10 good archers and find that they all are pulling the exact same amount into that back wall and at the end of that draw. I think that someone has to feel out, okay, I feel more stable, or I feel stronger, I feel better in my shot when I pull a little bit more with that shoulder blade in that elbow, where some people may feel a little bit better if they pull less. You also take into things into account like the release aid, depending on whether someone's shooting a back tension release, a thumb release, an index finger, etc. So that plays a big role. And then fatigue too. So just by the nature of using muscle and using it a number of times as you shoot, those fatigue levels are going to change based on how you're holding at full draw and pulling. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but to sum up the answer to your question, it shouldn't be a ton. It shouldn't be very little, but it should be something that someone feels comfortable with and feels stable with.
Okay. Which brings me to my next question. When is fatigue? So, we talk about, and I've talked to different guys shooting, whether they know what they're doing or not, I don't know, but you shoot, I've heard the theory where you shoot one arrow at a time. I shoot 10 arrows at a time. I shoot 200 a week, or even just in the moment, when do you start to recognize that it's fatigue and that I need to either let off so that I can regain, or whenever you shot too much, I don't know if there's such a thing, but what is fatigue in archery, and does it exist?
Yeah, I absolutely believe it exists, and I absolutely believe that it exists on a spectrum. So fatigue can be increased, fatigue can be decreased, fatigue can be maintained largely. And we see that in all training, in all other sports, and in all other actual sporting events. So I think it definitely exists. And what I mean by it exists on a spectrum is that, in a sense, after your first 2 arrows, there is some level of fatigue. Down on a cellular level, there are things that are occurring within the muscle tissue and within the nervous system that are starting to change. Now, that change isn't going to be noticeable for 99% of shooters after a few arrows. It's as that fatigue accumulates that you reach a threshold in which you start to feel and you start to notice that fatigue affecting, number one, your shot, meaning the actual outcome of your shot. And then number 2, the feeling behind your shot, or the perception of your shot, meaning I'm starting to get more unsteady. I'm having a hard time drawing, or a harder time drawing. I'm having a harder time holding my bow, holding that pin on target, reducing pin float. I'm getting more pin float. So all of those things are different measures of feedback that are saying you're at a mild state of fatigue, you're at a moderate state of fatigue, you're at a severe state of fatigue. So again, you're judging your fatigue based off of what you're feeling in your shot, and then second, the outcome of your shot. So as one fatigues, we're simply not going to be as accurate anymore.
Okay. All right. So how do you increase your ability to not fatigue as much? And I'm assuming that just shooting your bow all the time is probably not a great idea. I assume that there are other exercises that we could do. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to turn to you for this. Should all you do, or should you train, or should your training just be shooting your bow, or should there be other things implemented in to keep some kind of balance of all your muscles?
Yeah, so I really like how you asked that question. So I'll start with kind of 2 points right off the bat. And first and foremost, I like to say that there's nothing that's going to replace shooting your bow. There's nothing that's going to replace shooting your bow. And I believe shooting your bow is the most important thing to get better at shooting your bow.
Okay.
Shooting your bow progressively, meaning shooting more often, shooting more, is going to be a very effective and very important way to build endurance and to build stamina and to decrease fatigue, in the sense that when I started, I got fatigued after 20 arrows. Now, as I've shot my bow more, I get fatigued after 60, something like that. So that's the first thing. Is shooting your bow is very important, and it has a lot of value there. The second thing is that there are a lot of great archers out there that only shoot their bow, and they don't do anything outside of that. And they do very well, and they're very successful. So I'm not saying you absolutely have to do something outside of shooting your bow. However, to your point about balance, that's where we can get into training that is going to approach the body in a more well-rounded fashion, meaning that when I shoot my bow, it's very specific. Each arm and each shoulder blade is doing a very specific job, and they're not doing anything else. So what happens is we're missing certain pieces of musculature. We're overtraining some pieces of musculature and undertraining other pieces of musculature. So we start to create an imbalance, or we throw all these muscles and systems that are supposed to stabilize us, we throw them out of whack. So to your point, we can see some unbalance there. So that's one argument, I guess, for the importance of training outside of shooting your bow. A cross example is you take a baseball player or a pitcher. When that pitcher throws that ball, they're heavily relying on certain muscles, and they're not relying much at all on other muscles. To throw a baseball heavily involves internal rotation of the arm. The arm is not producing a lot of force in external rotation. So that's just a fancy example of a different realm that can see an imbalance if that baseball pitcher isn't doing something outside of just throwing a ball. The second thing that is really important on the fatigue side outside of shooting your bow is that when you shoot your bow, you can only do so much. And what I mean by that is you can really truly only shoot one arrow at a time. You're not going to get a dozen arrows together and rapid fire off a dozen arrows. You can only shoot so much before, like we said, your shot deteriorates and potentially bad habits come up. And then lastly, your bow only offers so much challenge. It's the same weight, it's the same shot, it's the same motion. And many people can probably understand the idea that our bodies adapt very well. So if you're only shooting your bow, yes, if you shoot enough, it's still hard, but you're not pushing past that threshold that's going to cause change. It's like if someone started out by running 3 miles. The first time they run 3 miles is going to be massively challenging. Second time, it's massively challenging. Third, it's massively challenging. It starts to get a little bit easier each time. Eventually, that 3 miles is the same 3 miles. It's the same, even the same road they're running. It gets to a point where it's not going to cause any change. Sure, it still feels challenging, but it's not going to cause any change on an adaptation level when we get down to the muscle and the nervous system and how it holds and how it performs and holds tension and all these things. So where I'm going to with this is that when you can do training outside of shooting your bow, we can overload the system. We can give the muscle and give the body more stress and more demand than we can just by shooting more arrows or by shooting the same arrows or by shooting the same bow. So by going in a different realm when it comes to exercise or comes to training outside of shooting your bow, we can overload with tension, with weight, with endurance and holding and different things like that. That is going to be a level, we'll just say for the sake of it, level 10 of difficulty. And now all of a sudden it's going to make the level 5 difficulty of shooting a bow that much easier. Going back to the example of running, if now we ask that person to do even the 3 miles, but they do it on an interval basis where they run extra hard and then they come back to a little bit of a lower intensity, or maybe we do increase the mileage, or maybe we increase the frequency. So we're changing these things up that are going to push the archer past the threshold of what they can just achieve with the bow.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. So now the way I look at it, there are two different archers. There's the archer that wants to be prepared for the one shot, for the kill shot, or maybe you shoot at multiple deer. They're the ones that like the competition, where they like to get out and shoot repetitively.
Sure.
Right. So how, if you're just that guy that's looking to hunt, well, you just need that one shot, and you're not the guy that is going out on weekends to 3D archery ranges, or you just like shooting. Because I like shooting. I do it just for fun. It's somewhat to prepare myself for the hunt, but I just enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I guess technically we don't necessarily need to do all that. What's your perspective? Do we need to train endlessly for that one kill shot, or how much is enough?
I'm laughing over here to myself because my honest answer that I want to say is go shoot more doe.
Yeah.
Truthfully is my honest answer. I think that yes, all these different things that I'm talking about is great preparation and can be really important for that one kill shot. But in a scenario like that's someone who's a diehard bow hunter, I think one of the best things you can do is shoot more doe. putting yourself in that scenario that is so unique in it, no matter what anybody says, there's nothing that can perfectly replicate or perfectly mimic what it is like to be in the woods on November 7th and you hear a grunt coming down the ridge and you see tines and you're mentally preparing. So just to the things I was talking about earlier, I'm somebody who I love the process. So I love to do everything I possibly can. My weightlifting fuels archery. The shoulder specific work I do fuels archery. My practice in the backyard fuels archery. I do everything I can. I almost feel like I train like a competitive shooter, but for the archery season. Do I have to do that? No, I don't think I do. I think I could certainly get away with less. I know people who get away with less, but to me, I like to do as much as I can. So again, I do that, but on the as far as preparing for that one shot, what's really, really important, I think some quality practice and get out and shoot more doe. And that's back to my story about the groundhogs. That's one reason that I do that is practicing on a moving target. Now, last thing I'll say is that if I had to put a number on it, I think for the average archer who's a serious archer, would really benefit from accumulating about 100 arrows a week. Maybe we'll say every other day they shoot 30 arrows. I think that's a good middle line. I don't think it's asking too much, and I don't think it's too little either. But I would say, well, in my opinion, it should be year round, but especially leading up to the season, that would be, and again, that's a ballpark number. Don't hold me to that. I know that you could absolutely make cases for more or less, but just to simplify it.
Okay. So we've kind of talked about the biomechanics of the shot. We've talked about some of the preparation, keep your muscles in tune, and if you're shooting more or less, or just making sure that you can at least train. But then there's the psychomechanics of the hunt, which goes to your point of, hey, you should shoot at more does or shoot more does. That helps. But how do you train your body to get this muscle memory so tight that when your head is about to explode because you see this giant buck walking down your trail, how much do you have to do to have your muscles overtake your brain?
A lot. I'll start by saying that in a moment of truth like that, maybe it's just my opinion, but you're probably not, and you shouldn't be. You most certainly shouldn't be thinking anything related to your body. I'm never going to tell someone that, when the buck they've been waiting for all season is coming in, that they should be thinking about this shoulder and that shoulder. That's not the case whatsoever. You had used the word muscle memory, and that is a common phrase you hear. And what that truly means.
I don't know if that's a true thing. I've heard is it real? Is it not real? I don't know. Yeah,
well, your muscle doesn't have a brain, so there. I guess I don't like to get real nitpicky on wording, but it's probably a bad phrase because then people start to think that your muscles remember things. But what it really is what's called automaticity, and that's I guess a version of saying automatic, and meaning that you have trained your nervous system to control your musculature the same way every single time. So the best example that I have is if we think back to like the Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi, right? Wax on, wax off, or the new Karate Kid was taking on and off his coat. His nervous system became so used to that motion that it was automatic in a stressful situation. So it's not that your muscles are remembering anything. It's that your nervous system has been trained to perform a movement pattern and to achieve a position the same way every single time. So the big two there again were performing a movement pattern or executing a movement pattern and achieving a position. So we apply that to the actual shot, we're achieving the position of the front arm, we're performing the movement pattern of the back arm or the draw arm, and then once we get to full draw, we are executing that task automatically the way we've trained our nervous system and our musculature to do that. And there's no shortcuts with that. It does take repetition. It's the same when it comes to weightlifting. It's the same thing when it comes to golf. All of these things, we start to develop the movement patterns and the positions that dominate. So you can have someone that ingrains bad movement patterns and positions, and that's their automatic. You can ingrain good movement patterns and positions, and that's your automatic. It takes repetition, and you've probably heard the phrase, it's not practice that makes perfect, it's perfect practice that makes perfect. So when I practice with awareness, like we said before, of my body and of my positions and movement patterns, when I practice that way, then that's going to refine it and make it my automatic go-to. So when you're in the shot or when you're in the woods, those things just happen. And then we can think about what's more important in that scenario, in my opinion. And that's everything from shot angle to whether or not I need to stop this deer, whether I think this deer is going to duck. Should I let him go farther into the lane? Should I take the shot when I get it? All those different things that you're thinking about, that's where your mind should be.
Okay. So let's take this to another level. You've practiced endlessly, but what you haven't done is you haven't practiced on the ground, in the ground blind, off the ground where you're up in a tree using some kind of a platform, or even doing some kind of hanging from a tree through with like a saddle system.
Yeah.
Where does it start to break down beyond getting too used to shooting on the ground? Should we be always performing in the tree at the level that you're going to be hunting at, or does it all help?
Yeah, I feel that it all helps, because when you think about what you're going to do for that day of shooting, you may or could benefit from having a goal, and the goal may be different every day. So for instance, when I think back to August and September, when I was really starting to think about practicing specifically for archery season for whitetail, I was spreading myself between shooting elevated, and I have a ladder stand in my backyard about 18 feet up. So I was shooting from that some days in an effort to mimic the shot mechanics and mimic the shot situations that I would see. So I was practicing from that, practicing seated, whether that's from a blind or whether that's hunting off the ground. And then I was also just shooting normally, just standing on a level surface, shooting flat, in an effort to just go back to the basics and make sure that my shot mechanics, without any external influencers as far as position and whatnot, make sure my shot mechanics were sound. So I think that it all helps, and it all depends on too what someone feels they need to work on, where someone's confidence lies, how they're going to be hunting. But I think that it's all important in the right time and place, and that it should have some reasoning and some backing behind it. And again, that's what's the goal? What do I need to work on? What's most important to me right now for where I'm headed in the near future?
Okay. So then the final aspect of this, let's say you shoot enough, it's repetitive, you've trained your muscles to overcome any psychological challenges you might have trying to keep yourself calm. You train from different heights, or you train from different hunting scenarios. You've got your front arm right, you've got your front shoulder right, you got your back shoulder right, and you're hitting the target. What do you aim at? What is there a certain point on a target that you should aim at? And going back to that other question is, how many arrows should you shoot at a time before recovering in between shots?
The first question that I'll ask for clarity is, are we talking about a whitetail target as far as the placement of the shot, or what are you thinking as far as
like just a block target of some sort? Where are you aiming on the target? repetitively, should I move points from one point to the next? Should I keep trying to hit the same spot? And then bring it into, am I just aiming small, no matter what it is, and just trying to make sure that where I placed it is where it ends up? And if it isn't, I have to make some corrections. Is it me? Is it my equipment? How do you start to kind of break it down if you're not hitting the spot that you want to hit?
Yeah, I normally, for myself at least, abide by the rule that 90% of the time or more, when I'm not hitting where I want, it's normally human error. It's easy to want to go to the equipment and say, oh, did I bump something? Is this off? Did this change? Did that change? More often than not, at least for me, I find that I'm making some fault, whether that's with my anchor point, whether that's with my grip, or whether that's with my release. So I look to myself first. I go into those different variables as far as my hands, my anchor points, how I'm releasing, and I try to check them off a list. And I say, okay, I feel that this is where my grip needs to be. Okay, check that. Check my anchor point. I feel that that's where it needs to be. Check my shoulder position, see if anything's off there, my head position, and then work my way back to my release and see is something happening there. And to you mentioned about the block, that's a lot easier to identify on a block. I have, I guess it's called the block target, and I like to shoot some of the different size dots depending on what yardage I'm at. Most of my shooting I do is on 3D targets, or more specifically a whitetail. I don't love shooting at a block or shooting at dots. I think it gets me too focused on a spot. I personally am not a big pick a spot type of person. What I find for me just personally is that when I pick a spot, my brain wants to see that spot. So it's really hard to satisfy your brain's desire to see a spot and cover up that spot with your pin, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So particularly when I'm shooting at a whitetail, I follow that front leg, or I guess it would be if you're looking at a broadside whitetail, the back side of its front leg, the back of its front leg, I follow that up. Once I hit the bottom line of the whitetail, I like to go up 3, 4, 5, 6 inches. Some people call it the pocket. And I like to just try to keep my pins stabilized in that little zone. I don't try to pick a hair. I just like to try to stabilize my pin. I either say to recently I've been saying to myself, commit to it, meaning commit to stabilizing my pin and, give that pin barriers. That pin is not allowed to go outside of these barriers. And I just keep it in there, let that pin kind of stabilize. It'll move a little bit and let my shot break as I build pressure on my trigger. Sometimes I say paint it. I heard that from Taylor Chamberlain of Urban Bowhunter. He says paint it, meaning paint that spot, that area. Yep. So that's where I'm at. The only time I really like to shoot a block is if I have to, for some reason, like if I'm shooting in the gym, or most of all is when I'm sighting in my bow.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. Very, very good topics all around. And my last question about shooting, and we'll get into some deer hunting strategies and stuff. What distance do you typically practice at? Do you find shooting at actual shot distance, your max or inside your max is best, or do you practice some of the longer shots to perfect that shorter shot?
Yeah. My sweet spot personally is I most of the time find myself at about 30 to 40 yards on a whitetail target. There's the main reason I do that is because I feel it's challenging enough without causing anxiety or without ingraining bad habits as I fatigue, meaning that I like to shoot a lot. And when I do shoot, I shoot a good volume of arrows. So if I'm shooting at 60 yards and I start to sense the slightest bit of fatigue, that really magnifies my pin float and can lead to some anxiety, I think, and almost some target panic in a sense. So
Right.
40 is enough, 40 more so 40 is enough that it's challenging. I can't just pull up and let the arrow fly and it's going to hit its mark every time. It's challenging enough, but I can maintain quality shots without running into anxiety as I get into high volume arrows and start to experience a little bit of fatigue. The second thing is that 40, I feel, is far enough to highlight errors, whereas 20 certainly, and even 30 can sometimes mask errors where you're off an inch, but that was just where your pin was moving around, or that shot looks pretty good. Where you start to get out to 40, I feel that if a shot's a little bit off, you're gonna notice it. You're gonna be a couple inches off. So it magnifies errors and lets me know that something's happening. And then to the last point would be, we talk about the principle of overreaching, going beyond what's going to be required. So personally, just in my experience with the deer that I've killed with a bow, the vast majority of them occur within 25 yards. It just seems to be how it happens. All the bucks that I've killed have been within 20. A lot of the doe have been within 20. So I feel if I practice at 30, 40, 50, that is going to prepare me for those shots. I've heard a good baseline that says half the distance of what you're confident with target practice is your ideal or max distance when you hunt with a bow. So I'll shoot out to 80 yards. My sight bottoms out at 80. I can't shoot any farther past that. I shoot out to 80 yards. The farthest I've ever taken a whitetail is at 34 yards. So I'll shoot out that far because, again, it magnifies errors. It's a good challenge. It teaches me. But that's not my regular. I'm not doing that every day. I prefer those middle ranges. They're going to be a little more quality, I think.
Gotcha. That's a great rule of thumb. I haven't heard that, but that's a great, I think, design to practice.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yep.
Going into deer season, I will be, as far as target practice goes, I will be really confident at 60 on a whitetail target that I can hit the vitals every time. So that would put me in an actual hunting situation, 30 to 40, depending on the scenario. Of course, there's a ton of factors that go into what's going to make that a potentially successful shot to take or not. But
right. Okay. So let's move into some of your hunting tactics. We've talked a lot about the bow shot, but you hunt a lot. It seems like every time I've talked to you by text or called you, I can talk to you, but I got to make sure I finish my hunt. And it seems like you hunt a lot. So I'm kind of interested to hear like how a day goes for you. And you mentioned that you want to talk about some suburban hunting, which I'm always up for some good suburban talk. It's an interesting topic to me. So what type of hunting are you into that made you bring up suburban?
Well, I live here in Western Pennsylvania, and where I live is more rural. I'm surrounded by farmlands here, but I can go a couple of minutes in any direction and hit major housing plans. And if I go 10 minutes in most directions, I'm hitting some really populated areas and some areas that are in real development or have been really developed. So it's pretty sweet, honestly. I'm really thankful because I can hunt farms. I can hunt what I would call big woods, couple 100 acres of woods, or I can hunt suburban type spots with housing around or roads or housing plans and different things like that. And sometimes it's a combination of all three. And that's what my hunt tonight was. So here in just the unique spot in which I am in Western Pennsylvania offers those three.
Okay. And you feel like the deer will travel to all these areas. They could care less if they're in the big woods or the farmlands or if they're in suburbia.
Yeah, I mean, as most of us know, deer are incredibly adaptable when it comes to finding food and finding cover. And each is unique as far as big woods versus farmland versus suburban hunting. Each is definitely different, but the deer use all of them. Suburban hunting is really interesting because it does seem to condense the deer a little bit. It also is unique and a lot of fun because it provides some pretty clear pinch points in funnels, whether that's between housing plans or roads or fences or those types of things. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
So how do you strategize between which one you're going to go to?
Well, I'm really lucky in that I hunt, I'd say 98% private ground. Just within a 10-minute drive of my house, I have access to maybe 10 different properties that total, maybe a dozen different properties that total somewhere in maybe 1,500 acres or so. And again, that's pretty much all private. So with all those properties being close, I do a lot of driving. I do a lot of scouting. I do the trail cameras, and I hunt a lot. So I see a lot. I'll see deer crossing the road, and especially this time of year with late season, a lot of it is seeing where the deer are out feeding. I'll go for a drive or I'll take strategic routes home from work or something like that. And just going off of past history. So between the convenience of being able to see these properties, look at trail cameras often, and being able to hunt a lot, it's going off of recent intel and going off of just instincts. What, you've probably talked a lot about, whether that's where deer are feeding, where that's bedding. Particularly this time of year, we obviously know with late season, food's really important. But within the past 2 weeks since late season for us opened back up after Christmas, what I'm really seeing is that the areas that have not gotten gun hunted are really hot. So I went to a spot tonight that I felt hadn't been gun hunted much, or I knew that some of this the part of the property hadn't gotten gun hunted, and man, there were deer all over tonight. So kind of a combination of all those things, really.
That's a good strategy to watch where the gun hunts occurred. And then when you're getting into that late season, that's where your deer are going to be. That's that makes sense.
Yeah. Because I live so close and because these are private properties, I really know or have a really good idea of who's hunting, where they're hunting, which properties surrounding don't allow hunting. So for instance, tonight I hunted a private piece of woods that is 100 acres on this side of the road. And it does have, I think, a little bit of gun hunting pressure, but I know that there is a couple of acres on the hill that does not allow hunting at all. And that just tends to be a sanctuary. So that's why I chose that. And it also happens to be a really good funnel that heads towards one of the best food sources and only ag food sources in the area. So knowing these private properties and knowing the surrounding properties and the private properties in the area really, really helps.
Gotcha. Okay. So getting into just where you are, how do you go about getting the permission to hunt these places?
Yeah, so that's something that I feel has really taken some time to develop. And truthfully, I view it almost as like a good challenge. I really enjoy looking at private pieces and seeing how or where I can get permission. The first big thing that has led to a lot of the private parcels that I've been thankful to hunt is using my connections in people I know. So through my line of work in fitness and sports injury, just by talking with people and getting to know people and them getting to know me, they'll know that I hunt. And when someone knows you, gosh, they're so much more likely to allow you to hunt than someone who doesn't. So the connections have really helped. One, I hunted a brand new property in a suburban area just northeast of Pittsburgh in November, and I was able to harvest a doe there. So that was really cool. It was a guy he used to hunt, doesn't have time to anymore, knows I like to hunt. I've established a friendship with him, and he said, heck yeah, you're more than welcome. So the connections are really big. The other side, or the other part, is getting to know landowners around. I've stopped and introduced landowners. I've tried to get to know landowners by offering to help them. Hunting groundhogs, which I mentioned I really like to do with a bow, that has gotten me a lot of property because I've started with that, something that's a little less intrusive as far as asking for permission to do. Got to know the landowner, and then they're happy to open up other opportunities for me. So that's a big one as well. And then I feel that there's a whole art to how you approach asking for permission to a private property. I think being as genuine and as open as possible with them, explain who you are, not just what you want to do, but why you want to do it. So, I just truthfully, I share with the person I'm asking permission to, I share that I love the outdoors. I really enjoy nature. I really enjoy hunting because I feel that it's a challenge and it's a great way for me to obtain meat and to spend time outside. And, I feel that they have an excellent piece of property, and ask if they would consider allowing me to hunt, and just being genuine and transparent. I think people really appreciate that. And I think too, taking the time to actually talk to them and get to know them, as far as not just knock on the door, hey, can I hunt? But if I can, I'll try to talk to the landowner as much as possible before I ask to hunt. Last year, it was funny. I was looking at the maps and noticed a little corner of a neighbor's property that was in a really good pinch point. So I decided, hey, I'll walk over one day and ask. And I ended up talking to the gentleman for about 45 minutes before I even mentioned anything about hunting. That wasn't even really intentional. He just kind of started to talk, and we just talked about different things in life, talked about him, talked about myself. And when someone gets to know you and understands you and understands what you want to do and why you want to do it, and it takes them away from just the idea that, there's just this stranger that wants to hunt, and that's it. It makes it a little more personal. And the last thing I'll say is, as I mentioned, all of the properties that I have permission to are very close by. So it really helps, I think, when you live close. Obviously that's going to be a limiting factor for some people, but if someone knows that you live down the road, and I can tell them, hey, I live in the White House, we have the pasture and the 2 horses out back, we have the detached garage. If they know that you live nearby, I feels a lot more comforting for them.
Gotcha. So let's talk about some of the gear that you bring into the woods. We've talked a lot about the shot and all that stuff, but how do you decide that you want to try to hunt that spot? What is it that intrigues you about that? And then how do you go in and scout it? And then when you do find it, there's basically a 3-part question here. Once you do go in and hunt it, what are you bringing with you into the woods? You bringing a stand, you placing a stand, or you just hunting from the ground?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing, as far as where I try to decide where I want to hunt, or even if I haven't established permission on a place, is at least in this area, is trying to find something that is unpressured, meaning that so I'm in Southwest Pennsylvania, and from what I've seen from the research, we have in Southwest Pennsylvania, we have the highest density of bow hunters in the country, of anywhere, right where I live. So there's a lot of people out, and there's a lot of people that hunt. So just by the nature of having a piece of property that's unpressured is huge. So most of the farms I hunt, either I'm the only one who hunts them, or very few other people hunt them. Or if other people do hunt them, I get into the areas that nobody else is hunting. So I would say pressure's probably number one to me. If there's a lot of other people hunting, or I know there's someone hunting even in the spot that I want to hunt, I won't even bother with it. Then I look at things like, bedding and food and pinch points and funnels and different things like that. So if I've established just the general area, then like we were saying earlier, I'm looking at the time of year, trail camera information, what I'm seeing based off of scouting, what I know based off of past information. Now that I've hunted these farms, the main farms that I hunt, I've hunted for 3-4 years now. I know a lot of what the deer do, so I love to hunt the doe as much as I hunt a buck. So I guess I'm talking kind of generally here.
Okay.
If it's for a buck, I do the trail camera stuff and look for scrapes and rubs and stuff like that. But I just kind of like to think of deer as a whole for most of the season, or a lot of it. So along with identifying what property is going to have the most potential, the food, the time of year, all those different things, I add on to that what landowners are seeing, and then what I see for my car. I'm a really big stay out of there type of person, because we do have so much hunting pressure in this area. I feel that if I don't have to go in there, I'm not going to. So I'm not someone who likes to go look for fresh sign, just because, on some of these properties that I hunt, if I haven't been in there in 3 months, then there hasn't been a human in there for 3 months, as far as I know. So I try to leave it like that. So I go a lot off of past intel, and do use some trail cameras, try to ask the landowners what they've seen.
Gotcha.
And then just general instinct, like I said, time of year, food, bedding, that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
Once I decide that, I have a number of pre-hung stands on the properties that I hunt in this area, maybe a dozen or so spread out over these number of acres. So those are kind of my tried and true spots. If I'm short on time, I'll pick one that makes sense for, again, knowledge from past years, instinct of based off of food, bedding, and what's going on for this time of year, et cetera, stuff like that. So sometimes I'll pick those tried and true stands. And if I'm being honest, sometimes if I'm just being a little bit lazy and it's been a long week and I just want to be able to climb up, I'll do that. I sparingly will use a climber if I feel it's right for the situation. Climbers are loud, obviously, but I do feel they're effective in certain scenarios. I've actually, this year I used a climber once, and it was on November 6th. And that's when I ended up killing my buck, my Pennsylvania buck. So I'll use a climber if I feel that, this scenario is right. I just started to get into the hang and hunt a little bit more with the sticks and a stand. When I hunted in that suburban area that I had mentioned earlier, where I had just gotten permission to, I hunted it twice. Well, I should say on the second time I hunted there, I killed a doe. So the first time I went in, I didn't have any prior time to look at it or scout it. So when I do that, if I'm going into a property just brand new, a lot of times I'll hunt from the ground just so that I can disturb minimally. I can go in, I can find a spot to set up. So in this particular instance, the landowner had a really old pile of firewood that was still stacked in a really nice big pile. So I had a ghillie suit on, and I kind of just tucked myself in and laid into that log pile, and had a great night. I saw 10 doe, 7 of them were within 20 yards. I just couldn't get a shot. Again, I'm hunting off the ground, and then it was really cool. At the end of the night, I had a 1.5-year-old buck within an arm's reach of
Wow,
me.
no kidding.
Yeah, it was super cool. Literally an arm reach. I was laying in this log pile, and to my right, I heard shh, 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 and sure enough, this young buck just walked right past me. So anyways, I had been in there hunting on the ground, got an idea what trees were in the area, what the deer could possibly do there. Went in the next week with sticks in a stand and was able to kill a doe. And actually, a nice 3.5-year-old 8-point that, I was already tagged out at that point, but that was pretty cool to have him within range too. Yeah. So, pre-hung stands, a climber, if it's going to work, and the sticks in a stand. And then again, I like ground hunting when there is no other opportunity to hunt from a tree. Some areas there just are no trees that are going to work. Either they're not big enough, they're too squirrely to be able to get in, or there's just not a tree that's in the right spot. That happens to me a lot of times. So I'll opt to hunt off the ground, and it is harder. But I've taken a couple of deer off the ground. It's a blast. It's a challenge. The encounters are really, really neat, but it just gives you a little bit of extra versatility. If you can't set up a ground blind, and again, there's no trees in the right spot, or there's just no trees in general, it gives you some versatility to at least give you a little bit of hope, or just open up the opportunity for you to at least try. So that's been effective in the right time and place. It's not always certainly the right option, but it can be useful, that's for sure, in the right time.
Gotcha. What do you like for a bow and arrows?
I shoot a PSE Evolve. It's 31 inches axle to axle. It's at 71, 72 pounds. Awesome bow, really smooth draw. I like it because it's very smooth to draw, quiet, quick. So that's the bow I shoot. I just shoot a gold tip hunter arrow. It's kind of the middle of the line hunting arrow from Gold Tip. Number one, I'm not a real huge gear junkie. I just haven't really gotten into it, and just hadn't had much of an interest in getting real in depth with that stuff. But number two, and probably the more important factor, is I go through dozens and dozens and dozens of arrows every year. My bow shop loves me because of the groundhog hunting. I have dozens of arrows that are down groundhog holes here in Western Pennsylvania. So I can't be shelling out too much money for arrows. So that's a middle of the line arrow that I shoot. As far as a broadhead, I really like the Rage Hypodermic. I think I've always used it. I've never felt the need to try anything different, because if I put the arrow in the right place, it's just absolutely devastating. I've taken 3 deer this year, and I have watched them all crash within 50 yards. And beyond that, they fly really, really, really true. And to me, that's important, obviously, for accuracy. But then on top of that, I really like to shoot throughout the season. So when someone shoots a fixed blade, it can make it kind of tough to shoot throughout the season, because you're not going to shoot a boatload of fixed blades into your block target. And sometimes I've heard of people getting their fixed blades to fly like their field tips, but I know a lot of times they don't. So that, kind of makes practice a little tough if you don't know if you're hitting in the right place or they're not shooting the way they should.
Right.
So I just like that hypodermic for those couple of reasons. But as far as equipment, yeah, I think that's the basis run.
Yeah, I don't think the equipment makes the hunter, but by any means.
No, I think it's a tool, right? There are some good tools or some bad tools. Some are better than others. But I think that if you have a pretty good quality tool, which I feel I do, then I put more emphasis on myself, my shooting ability. Yeah,
it's nice to have the right tool when you need it, but definitely there's, I think, more important aspects of hunting that makes the hunter than the stuff you bring with you, for sure. So before I get into asking you about your most memorable deer hunt, I got to know, how do you hunt groundhogs with a bow and arrow?
Oh man, it took me a lot of hunts to figure it out, but there's 2 styles. I break it up into 2 styles. The first one is spot and stock, and some people could conclude what that would mean. So I'll see a groundhog pretty far off and try to find the best route out of sight to get to it. So it's really important to know that groundhogs have incredible sight. I routinely have them spook back into their holes when I'm 200 yards away. So they have incredible sight. So sometimes it's spot and stalk. That happens a lot with more open ground. And then the other is, I've phrased it just for myself, but I call it creep and kill, meaning that I'll slowly work through an area that I know has a lot of groundhog holes, whether that be an embankment or a wood line, or even just a ridge running through a field. I'll slowly creep through, and I'll be looking. And a lot of times the encounters will be really close. It'll be 30 yards, 20 yards, 15 yards, and it's a quick shot. It happens quick. But I think the thing that helps me the most is that I've hunted the farms that I hunt for groundhogs, I've hunted them a number of times. So I truly have hundreds of groundhog holes memorized. I know exactly where they are down to the foot. So I'll kind of make a route in my head that I want to travel, and travel along that. And I'll either see one out from a distance and try to make a stalk, or I'll creep along that. And I could talk about it for forever. But I'll save most of it. But there's a lot that goes into it. Again, the route that you take, you do have to consider the wind. You do have to consider putting yourself on a horizon. You do have to be very visual. You're using your glass. You're thinking about, is the sun at my back? Is the sun at his back? There's a lot of different things, excuse me, but it takes a lot of stealth, a good route, and a good, I guess, stalking strategy or stalking ability, and then just memorizing the holes and making some good shots. So it's a lot of fun. It's excellent practice. It really is helpful for the farmers for crop damage, protecting the livestock, to try to limit the number of holes in pastures, and then unstable ground from the holes too. So the farmers really appreciate it, and I'm happy to do it for them.
Nice. It seems like a good way in too, if you wanted to.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I've gotten a number of properties to whitetail hunt and turkey hunt on from starting with groundhogs.
Nice. Very cool.
Well,
let's put it all together and go on a memorable deer hunt, and kind of bring the shot, the biomechanics, your scouting techniques, your groundhog hunting techniques. Let's see if we can put it all together. Where are we going to go on your hunt?
So we'll go to a meaningful hunt for me, a meaningful place. And I mentioned it briefly. It was actually the same farm that helped really motivate me to start Archery Strong, but it's no longer, sadly. It was a 60-acre horse farm here in Mars, PA, and it was called the Stonehouse Farm. And ever since I was a boy, my mom had horses at this farm, and she would take me to this farm, and I would play in the stalls, and I'd sweep the aisle of the barn and go look for snakes in the hayloft. And I grew up there essentially. And when I was old enough, I had my first job there, tossing hay bales and doing some weeding and some different things, when I was probably 11 or 12. So I grew up there. The farm meant a lot to me. It really helped refine my character. It was an escape for me. It was a place of solitude for me, and ultimately a place of adventure for me. So I continued to work there, just here and there to help the woman who owned it. She became a very, very, very dear friend, kind of like a grandmother to me. And I worked there up until last year, and she had broken the news to me that with all the development going around, they were going to sell their farm, and they wanted to sell and move to Florida. It was, again, a horse farm, so they wanted to move to a horse area in Florida. And that was obviously just really sad, really devastating. This 60 acres was just the absolute pinnacle of a whitetail farm. It was just a horse farm. There were no food plots or hinge cutting or anything, but it just had everything. It had really nice hay fields. It had thickets because it had been logged. It had a stream running through it. The access was good. And the best part is I was the only one who hunted it. Just an awesome, awesome place. I'd taken a number of deer. So this farm was being sold, and I had hunted it throughout the fall and was trying to enjoy it. And it got to be mid-October. And the very next day, the ownership of the farm was going to change. So this evening was my last hunt. I don't remember the day in October, but it was in October, and it was going to be my final hunt there, the last time I could hunt. So I think I wanted to go out with a challenge, so I decided to hunt from the ground. I had pre-hung stands set there that had been super successful, but I just wanted to do something different. So bordering this farm was an old abandoned Christmas tree farm. And this Christmas tree farm is only 10 acres, I think, but I truly believe that every bit of 30 to 40 to 50 deer would bed on this 10 acres. I mean, I had nights where the best night I was ever there, I saw 52 deer pour out of that bedding area.
Wow.
Just awesome. So I thought, all right, I'm going to get on the edge of the pasture, which is the property line as well. The edge of the pasture, it slopes down to a creek, and then it slopes back up into the abandoned Christmas tree farm. So I was tucked into a little brush pile. It was a brush pile that I had actually made, not purposely for hunting, but a tree had fallen on the fence and the horse trail. So I cleared the brush and put in a pile. So I tucked myself in that pile, and I'm sitting there enjoying the evening. It's beautiful. And wouldn't you know it, the wind's just the exact opposite of what it should have been. So I may have heard a deer snort or something or blow, and I thought, you know what? This spot's a bust. I got to do something. I had a half hour at daylight by the time I decided that this was not going to pan out. The wind had just been consistently blowing into that bedding area, 180 degrees what it was supposed to. So I thought, well, what a better way to enjoy the last night on the farm than just a really slow walk. So if you picture this farm, like a square. Say a square piece of paper. You fold that piece of paper in half. If you kept it folded slightly so that you have kind of two slopes, right? And then you have the crease down in the middle. So kind of like, I guess you could, you're thinking of kind of like a long valley. On one side of the valley was the pastures in the hayfield. The other side of the valley was the timber. Right down in the bottom of that valley where the crease in the paper would be was a stream. And along the stream was a horse path where the folks who boarded horses there and rode horses would go on what they call a trail ride. So a trail ride along the creek. It's awesome because it's all dirt, right? Because it's been run down by horses. It's, only a foot or two wide, but it runs right along the creek. So on one side of me, I have all the logged timber. And on the other side, there's some timber that slopes up to the hayfields and the pastures. So I'm on the complete opposite end of the farm. And again, the wind's blowing the wrong direction. So I'm going to be able to walk all the way along this creek, all the way down through the bottom of this valley on this horse trail with the wind in my face. So I did so. Again, I had a half hour, maybe a little bit more daylight left. So I walk all the way along, just kind of slowly going and looking, just enjoying the night. And I actually didn't see, I don't think I saw any deer as I was walking. So I got all the way down to the end of the farm, and I curved back up to where the hayfield is. And I just poked my head out of the wood line, looking back to kind of where I'd come from, down the hayfield and down the pastures. And there's a group of about 10 or so doe just right off the edge of the wood line in the field. And they're just standing and they're feeding, and they're perfectly fine. They feel safe. They don't seem alert at all. So I thought, well, you got a little bit of light left. This is kind of my opportunity. So I just slowly started to walk. I just kind of hugged the wood line, but slowly started to walk. I had my ghillie suit on, so I was well camouflaged. And as I was starting to walk, I noticed a doe broke off from the group of doe. And she's walking along the wood line, but she's walking right at me. This doe group was probably 150 yards away, and she's kind of walking, kind of trotting, just along the wood line. And so I just kneeled down. I'm in maybe 1 foot tall grass, 1 foot tall hay. And I just kneel down. I kneel down. I'm on both knees. I'm sitting on my butt. I've got my left shoulder pointing towards her so that I could draw and shoot. And I'm just sitting there, and she's coming. She's walking. She's trotting. She's at 100 yards. She's at 90. She's at 80. She's at 70. And I'm thinking certainly she's going to pick her head up at some point, see me, do the little duck, head side to side, up, down type of thing they do.
Yep.
And then she's going to turn around and she's going to trot off. But her head's down, just looks like she's smelling she's just kind of smelling, she's just kind of looking, and she keeps coming. And she's coming. She's at 50, she's at 40, she's at 30, and I can't believe it. And she's coming, she's at 30, I draw, she's at 20. She gets to 10 yards facing me, just head on, and she finally picks her head up and she stops. She wasn't alert, like, oh crap. She was just like, what is that? And she's facing me at 10 yards. I'm on my knees. I'm at full draw. And I center my pin on that small hole below the neck between the shoulders.
Yep.
And I let that arrow go. And she takes off and she runs maybe 30 yards and just barrels into the wood line. And I couldn't believe it. I think I pulled out my phone and called my fiance immediately. I was so excited. It was just the most awesome ending to my time there at that farm and with that hunt. And the blood trail was massive. I was shooting actually a Rage Trypan that night to try those out. And blood trail was massive. It went all the way through her, hitting the heart, hitting the lungs, all the way through. The only thing that hadn't come out were the fletchings. And she had only gone 40 yards and piled up. And man, it was just so awesome. I went up, I got my truck, drove down into the hayfield and loaded her up. And it was just a really cool ending to that farm and a really cool hunt. I mean, I can picture it so vividly. I just couldn't believe it. I was just shocked that happened. Just super, super blessed. It's cool.
Sometimes they surprise you. That's for sure.
Yeah.
What a great way to end on a high note off of a farm that meant so much to you. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It was special. It was exciting. It was definitely a memory that I'll cherish for a while.
Very nice.
Or forever.
Well, let me hit you with 10 rapid fire questions here.
Yeah. Go for it.
What's your number one hunting tip of all time?
My number one hunting tip of all time is to ask why. I try to take every single hunt and every unique thing that happens, and I ask why. Why did the deer travel this way? Why did the deer stop and do that? Why did that shot occur like that? Why did I see that? Why is that sign there? Just continually ask why to find the reasoning behind what you're seeing when you're hunting, and I think that helps us learn a lot.
Gotcha. All right. We all have these things that we sometimes forget to bring with us in the woods, and it drives us crazy for the entire hunt. What's that one thing for you?
Oh, I like to think I'm pretty organized. I feel like most of the time at the end of a lot of hunts, I wish I had brought my headlamp.
Yep.
I never do. I don't bring a backpack if I don't have to. I don't like having the extra gear and the extra possibility of scent. And I know my headlamp's in there, and I think about it, and I just, I'm not going to need it. And sure enough, tonight I had to stay in the stand all dark because I had deer around, and I could have used it.
Yep, I'm with you. I do love my headlamp, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
Oh, I don't know if it's my biggest one in life, but it's one that's come up recently. I remember talking to my fiance about it, and that would be when you reach out to someone or you make an effort to someone, particularly through a text, and they don't respond. Sometimes they'll text me and they'll ask me something and I'll give them an answer or something, or try to start a conversation. They won't respond, or I'll, text somebody that I'm thinking of them or hope they're doing well or something and won't get a response. That bothers me. You make the effort and care enough to do that. A response is nice.
That's a modern day pet peeve right there.
That's right.
How old are you today?
Today I am 25.
25. All right. What would you tell the 16-year-old Christian Williams, knowing what you know today about life?
Think about the future. I felt like, man, when back when I was a teenager, all I cared about was shooting groundhogs, where the best party was at, and is there gas in my truck?
Sure.
I never really thought about what I wanted to do one day. I never really thought about what was important to me. And maybe I'd say that's probably normal for most teenagers, but I wish I had thought a little bit more deeply about where life was going and what it meant to me.
Okay. All right. You meet a stranger at a hotel lobby at a hunting convention somewhere in the world, and they ask you what you do for a living. What do you tell them?
I tell them I don't know yet.
I like that. All right.
I'm doing a lot of different things right now, this being one of them, but I'm enjoying it and learning a lot.
Nice. What did you have for breakfast today?
I didn't have anything. I didn't eat. I was too busy working. I didn't eat until 2:00 today.
All right. You get a billboard on the side of a highway. It's a blank canvas. You can put anything you want on it. What would it say?
Jesus loves you.
Very nice. If I say the word successful to you, who's the first person that pops into your head and why?
That's a great question. I would have to say one of my best friends. He is been a mentor to me. His name is Mike, and I think he's successful because I think he has really established his identity. He's established his values. He's established what's important to him. And he has established a way to really help people, influence people, and to live his life in a way that I think is really honorable.
Very cool. All right. What's a typical day in your life look like?
A typical day in my life right now starts very early.
Okay.
Around 4 or 5. I coach CrossFit in the mornings typically. So I coach CrossFit in the mornings. I will normally work out at some point, or I'll shoot at some point. After that, it often involves either some sort of farm chores or work for Archery Strong. And then if God willing, it allows me to hunt in the evening. And then after that, it can be just about anything. It could be goofing off. It could be a podcast or just about anything.
Gotcha.
Or time with my fiance.
All right. And what's a typical deer hunting day in your life look like? It sounds like it's part of your daily routine for quite a bit of the year.
Yeah, I've been really lucky the past couple of years just with my work situation. A lot of self-employment type jobs, a lot of flexible jobs, and a lot of ability to schedule my work the way I want it. So I've been able to hunt a lot. I love to hunt evenings. I will hunt mornings, but 95%, 98% of my hunting is in the evening. So I try to give myself a general rule that I like to be in the stand 2 hours before last light. So not 2 hours before sunset, but 2 hours before last light. So for instance, tonight, last light was at 5:40. So I was in about 3:40, 3:45. It's enough time that I feel like I'm early enough that not too much is going on, but not so early that I end up getting bored because, I don't know about you, but if I hunt enough, sometimes when there's no action, I get a little bit anxious and even a little bit bored. So as much as I love it. So that's my typical hunt.
I'm with you. Very good. Well, I got to tell you, Christian, this has been a absolute blast. I've learned a lot about the physiology of the bow shot and the biomechanics, and you've gone deeper than a lot of our guests, I think, would even dream of going on a particular subject matter. And it's been really refreshing and interesting to have you talk about those subject matters, which I can tell you're passionate about. And I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yeah, I am too, Jay. I really appreciate the patience and the opportunity to talk through it. Like you said, I'm passionate about this stuff. It means a lot to me, and anybody who's willing to listen and anybody who may want some help, that's why I'm here. That's why I do this. So it's exciting for me to come on this, and I love talking. I love talking about archery and bow hunting, so it's been great. Thank you.
Very cool. And if we have created more questions than answers, as we sometimes do on the show, where can people find you on social media? How do they connect?
Sure. So on Instagram, it's archery.strong. So archery and then a period strong. We're on Facebook. Feel free to reach out through email. It's christian@archery-strong.com. And then our website is www.archery-strong.com. So there's a dash between archery and strong.
Very cool, man. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and we'll have to have you back on again at some point.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you again, Jay, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Well, I do appreciate Christian coming on the show and kind of breaking that all down. I think the off season's a great time to start working on your bow shot, really get honed in and get some of that so-called muscle memory built up for the next season. And hey, I like his idea. Let's go shoot some groundhogs while we're at it, make some friendships with some farmers, and see where it brings us. Once again, thanks to Christian Williams for coming on the show and letting us know all he knows about the biomechanics of the bow shot. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter @ChasingAntler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, "Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry." And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay. I'm Dusty Phillips.
And I'm J. Scott Ammann. We'll see you next time right here on the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunt Podcast.